Seem familiar? It should do if you fly this thing. Hello and welcome back. Today we're going to be flying your dad's favourite aircraft, the F-14 Tomcat, specifically the F-14A. And one of the main problems with this plane is that the RWR on this thing can't pick up pulse Doppler signals for whatever reason. I'm sure there's some like reason for this, I have no idea, but it kind of holds this thing back a little bit in game. Now, does that mean it's a bad aircraft? No, not at all, and I'm going to show you why in this video. You can still apply damage to your enemy team, don't worry about that, but you do need to change the way you fly it a little bit. Especially something like the F-14, which a lot of people generally regard as like this, you know, like a superior BVR platform. BVR obviously stands for beyond visual range, so flying high, shooting missiles at long range. I think this thing excels a little bit more in close quarters. But why am I even flying the F-14A, you may ask, when the F-14B exists? Well, the reason for that is because with the recent BR changes that Gaijin have added, they've also added an extra BR bracket for the simulation game mode. The matchmaking in this sim works a little bit different, where you don't just queue up for a match and then if you're lucky it gives you a down tier, if you're unlucky it gives you an up tier kind of thing. You have set days for where certain BRs are at the top of the bracket. So for instance, 4 days out of 8, now it changes every 8 days is the length of the cycle. On 4 out of those 8 days, 11.7 is going to be at the top of its bracket, going down to I think about 10.7. Which means that if you play an 11.7 aircraft like the F-14A for instance, you are basically guaranteed a down tier on these particular days, and this is something that is amazing for these type of aircraft, because previously 11.7 didn't have a down tier. It was 8 days, a continuous like guaranteed up tier against F-16s every single time. So these planes were generally not really that playable or that viable at top tier, but now they are. Now the first thing you need to do when you fly the F-14 is you need to bind a button for the wing sweep control. Now don't worry, it's not going to be that complicated, but what you need to do on the runway is you need to go into the manual sweep mode, put the wings all the way forward to 0% sweep angle, and then you go back into automatic mode. What this is going to do is when you fly around and you get to the merge and you need to start turning and need those wings in the forward position, you're just going to hit the toggle button for the manual wing control mode, and it's going to automatically put the wings back to the last position that you set them manually, which in this case would be forwards. And doing it this way just saves you faffing about with it as you're trying to fight. Now speaking of dogfights, I did lose the first half of the footage of this fight. Well, I didn't lose it, but it had some like really bad audio issues and I just wasn't able to fix it or anything like that, so I do apologise for that. However, no one's actually been shot down yet. As you can see though, I am trying to shoot down this MiG-23 here, but he decides he's having none of it and ends up flaring it off, because flares actually work at 11.7, because very few missiles at this battle rating actually have IRCCM. I mean, there's a few planes like the Harrier, I think, that gets the AIM-9M, and obviously the Su-25. Actually, is there a Su-25 with R-73s at 11.7? I think there is. Anyway, what I'm doing right here is I'm in a rate fight. Now I'm going to explain the term here a little bit, because I know not everyone is fluent in fighter pilot bullshit. So what a rate fight is, or what's also called a 2-circle fight, is it's just one continuous turn. And the reason you would want to be in one continuous turn is because some planes are better than others at maintaining their speed while they turn. As you can see, that MiG-23 obviously didn't maintain his speed. Generally, as an aircraft maneuvers, it loses speed, and then it has to either sacrifice altitude or use its engine to get that speed back. Right now, the F-14 is very, very good at not losing its speed in a turn, especially around the 400 to 500 knots, with the wings manually all the way forwards. That's a very important part, by the way. Now, the MiG-23s in this fight, I don't think were very experienced players. Obviously, if they were, I think a 3v1, it goes without saying, you know. I'm pretty sure they didn't have their wings forwards manually as well, because obviously it makes a big difference on that plane as well with the wing sweep. And they just ended up running out of energy and decided to try and run away from the fight and just give me their 6 o'clock here. I mean, I'll take it, but like, you know, I don't understand why people just do stuff like that, because it's just so obvious, and I'm just gonna... Anyway. One issue that the F-14 kind of suffers from as well, apart from the RWR not being able to pick up anything with pulse Doppler, which is, you know, a bit of a problem at 11.7, let's just say, is that the radar itself only gets an HDN mode. Now, the HDN stands for head-on something, I think. Basically what it means is that it only picks up targets that are flying towards you, so anything that's flying away from you, your radar isn't going to see. In some cases it does see them, I know. I don't know what the criteria for that is. Range definitely seems to be something, difference of speed as well, so if someone is moving away from you incredibly fast, your radar can sort of pick them up, or if you're incredibly close or something like that. Maybe background has something to do with it as well. I don't know how it works. However, if you're just like scanning for, you know, if you're inside a cat point or something and you're trying to scan for targets, you're just trying to actually find people, it isn't necessarily an advantage to have this, because you can, you know, essentially you can only see half the battlefield because you can only see the people that are facing your direction. The upside to this is that the radar on F-14, and this is kind of what it's famous for, has insane range. I mean, you will have no problem picking people up at 60 miles. This is like almost like the other end of the map, right? If they're coming towards you, you can see them with the F-14 radar. Another problem is though with the F-14 is that you do get, I think it's 80 degrees of left and right scan angle, which is quite a wide scan, at least in the TWS mode, which I think is the most useful mode. However, you only get about 4 degrees of elevation, so when the radar's scanning left to right, it's obviously not just doing that on one plane, it goes up and down a little bit as well, and on the F-14 it only does that about 4 degrees, whereas you compare that to something like the Russian radars, which have about 10 degrees on average. It's like kind of like looking through a mail slot trying to find people, so you need to have the nose on sort of the same level as your opponent, because if they're like way above you or whatever like that, the radar just isn't going to pick them up. Well, it don't even have to be above you that much for the radar to not pick them up. That's the point I'm trying to make. Now, if you use the radar tilt function, you can kind of mitigate this a little bit, but at the end of the day, it is a disadvantage because you have to faff about with the radar itself, whereas other planes like the F-16 even just find people so much quicker. The upside to the radar is it does kind of it does pick people up relatively quickly. This is a problem that the Russian radars have, of where you can just point them at something and then for like 10 seconds or something, they just will not pick it up for whatever reason. The F-14 generally picks its targets up pretty good, pretty quick, and even in the ACM mode as well. The ACM mode in this is actually really good. It also gets a vertical scan mode as well, like most other 4th gens. And look at that Vigan just completely fly by, not seeing me, and then obviously I eat a friendly missile because this is War Thunder. The reason I'm so like critical of the radar on this thing, because it really isn't that bad, but if you only play RB, you might not realize this, but when it comes to the simulator game mode, right, you don't get any markers or anything like that. You're stuck inside the cockpit, so there's a huge portion of your screen that's already being blocked. You really rely on your avionics, you rely on your RWR, and you rely on your radar in order to find people, like, say, 60-70% of the time at this kind of battle rating. And obviously with the F-14A's RWR not picking up pulse Doppler, it will pick up MiG-23 radars, by the way, so that is something they'll show up as, I think, HI or something on the RWR, you can see here in a second, because the MiG-23s obviously don't use pulse Doppler. But this is something that the F-14 kind of suffers with, is just situational awareness, because it's a huge plane, it has a really big heat signature. You constantly have to be looking around, seeing it, just to make sure that nobody sneaks up onto you, gets onto your 6 o'clock and fires off a missile, because they're going to be incredibly hard to flare off. And you do only get about 60 of the flares as well, which is alright for this kind of battle rating, but with the huge heat signature that this thing gets, you do have to spam them out quite a bit. And like I said, with the lack of avionics that this thing kind of gets, for lack of a better term, it can be kind of difficult to play this plane against a well-coordinated team, or if there's just players on there that are very experienced and they know what they're doing, because of your lack of situational awareness that you already have. It's going to become that much more difficult to stay out of these kind of tricky, unwinnable situations. In the footage there, by the way, you can see that the guy I just killed did the exact same thing that the other 2 guys did from before, and that was a different person as well, when they just eventually decide they've had enough and they just fly in a straight line. It doesn't... I see this so often in this game. I don't know what people are thinking. It doesn't work. If you're in a turn fight and you decide, okay, I'm just going to go straight now, it doesn't work. There's missiles at this battle rating. Maybe it works in props or whatever, but not here, you know? Anyway, I took care of him, and now I'm fighting his friend here. Now, you can see that he is a little bit slow. I know it's kind of hard to see on the videos because of the whole like YouTube compression and stuff like that. But he is quite slow. He's in front of me here, and he just went around that mountain. I'm trying to just not cut across the mountain. I'm kind of trying to just stay behind him. I don't want to cut into a circle too much, just because it will give me like a kind of some sort of high aspect shot. And I realize, okay, I've probably got all the time in the world here, so I'm just going to take my time, control my speeds, get into a nice little low aspect position, and he ends up crashing into the top of Polygon Mountain there. Now, for this next clip here, whenever I make these videos and I talk about, you know, the enemy players, I try not to insult anyone, because I know everyone was inexperienced at some point. Everyone's been bad. Even, you know, I was terrible when I first started playing this guy. I think it took me about a week before I got my first kill in a prop match, right? It's just, it is hard to learn this game, but when you look at these two players that I'm about to merge with, I just merged with the Draken, but then I see on the RWR that there's a MiG-23 behind me because he's locking me up on radar. Obviously, the RWR, again, does pick up MiG-23 radars, thank God. Because he locks me up, it tells me that he's there. So I duck below this mountain, I put my wings forwards, just to use, you know, use the mountain as a little bit of cover here for the merge. He merges and ends up going into a turn at probably full speed. I mean, I'm guessing he's doing about probably 650 knots at this point, because he is not getting the nose round at all. He does do a good thing and ducks behind that mountain. I don't know where the hell that Draken went, by the way, because he should be right behind me about to fire a missile, but he's not. I follow him around this mountain. It's pretty easy to get inside his turn circle because his turn circle is so goddamn wide. He does seem to have slowed down a little bit now, but at this point it's just too late. Ducks below the mountain. I'm sitting right behind him, and he again decides to just fly off in a straight line. I mean, I don't know, he probably lost visual at some point, but it's not like, you know, I mean, I was right behind him, I don't know. I find the Draken again, he's quite slow behind me there, so I decide, okay, screw it, I'm quite fast, I'm going to go into the vertical. Usually I don't like taking Drakens into the vertical in big heavy aircraft, because it can be a little bit dangerous, but it can also be a good way to actually defeat Drakens, and lo and behold, he doesn't actually follow me up here. He stays down there and decides to fly in a straight line. Now that kill was so easy, I didn't even bother including it in the video, but in this next clip here, you can see me dispatch of a MiG-23M pretty easily with a radar-guided Sparrow, because we're over rocky terrain, and rocky terrain makes multi-pathing rather difficult, which is why over half my videos are on Afghanistan. I end up turning the radar over to their spawn, just because you never know, you might actually end up finding something. It's always a nice little, it's always a good thing to do, just, you know, try not to spawn camp it. It's not a very nice thing to do, but if you're going to do it, then, you know, whatever. Blame the game, not the player, right? I hear this missile approaching, which allows me to flare it off, which I think is a little bit, I don't know. I mean, the missile's traveling faster than the speed of sound, so naturally, if it's coming from behind me, I shouldn't be able to hear it before it hit, you know. Yes, I have that option turned on as well, by the way. I don't know how realistic that is. Anyway, it saved me here, so let's not complain about it. Now, obviously, I put the wings forward all the way immediately and start getting into a nice little rate fight here, because the F-14 can do that better than the Draken. I have lost visual of him at this point, and I try and find him here. I thought I found him here. I try and lock him up with a sidewinder missile, but it ends up being a friendly 14, so I don't shoot because I actually check my targets. And oh, look, there's the Draken. He just flies by my canopy. I take it to the vertical because I was a little bit spooked at that point. Probably shouldn't have done it, because look how slow I get up here. I'm at about 240 knots already, and if he'd have followed me up here, he probably would have had an advantage, because the Draken handles so much better at these low speeds than the F-14. However, he decides not to do that and just fly in a straight line for a little bit and do this kind of like weird delayed climb, and he ends up eating one of my missiles. Anyway, that was the match. Final score was, I believe, 17-3, with one of those deaths obviously being the team kill there. Now, that might seem like a pretty good score, but let's just not forget the enemy team wasn't very experienced, and most of them were flying premiums and stuff like that. So yeah, just take that with a grain of salt as an indication of how good this plane is. I think against more experienced opponents, you will struggle a little bit more just because of the lack of RWR and stuff like that. Also, one thing I forgot to touch on in the video, when it comes to the Phoenix missiles, in short, just stay away from them. They're just not very useful. Stick with the Sparrows. Trust me, you're going to do a lot better. Again, I do have my Discord server in the description if you're looking for people to play with. And yeah, if that sounds like something you're interested in, I hope to see you there. Click the link. and I also hope to see you in the next video. Thank you very much for watching, and cheers.